My name is Daniel Carter, and I live in a small coastal town called Brighton. Some people hear the name and immediately think of tourist, laughter, and sunny beaches lined with colorful umbrellas. But my Brighton is different. It is not the postcard city that holiday brochures try to sell. It's the quieter side streets, the small corner cafes, the scent of salt water drifting in the air at dawn, and the rows of houses built decades ago, carrying the weight of generations. My house is one of them. I bought this house 10 years ago, when I was 25. It wasn't easy. Every paycheck from my first job went straight into savings, and I worked night shifts at the local docks, just to make sure I had enough for the down payment. People around me used to say, "Why work so hard, Daniel? Rent is easier. You're still young. Enjoy life." But I always believed in roots. Maybe it's because deep inside, I feared being rootless, forgotten, drifting like seaweed in the current. Owning a home, to me, meant stability. It meant safety. It meant something in this world couldn't be taken from me. At least, that's what I thought back then. The house itself is nothing extraordinary from the outside. A modest 2-story brick building with ivy crawling up one side and a small garden in front where roses bloom in spring. But to me, it is more than walls and furniture. It is my refuge. Every corner holds a memory of friends who visited, of nights spent reading by the fireplace, of the silence that comforted me when the world outside felt overwhelming. My parents, Richard and Evelyn, have lived in Brighton their whole lives. They're the kind of people who value appearances, who care deeply about what the neighbors think, and who believe that success is measured by family and children. My brother Mark, the younger one by 2 years, has always been their golden child. He married his college sweetheart, Sophie, and now they have 2 children, Ella and James. To my parents, Mark's life is the perfect picture: a good job, a loving wife, grandchildren they can brag about. And then there's me, 35 years old, unmarried, no kids. I have a decent career as a project manager in a logistics company, enough to live comfortably, travel once in a while, and maintain my home. But because I never married, my parents quietly decided that I was missing something essential. They never said it outright in the early years, but I could see it in their eyes during family gatherings, hear it in their sighs when conversations turned toward weddings and babies. To them, my life was half finished. Growing up, Mark and I weren't close. He was always the social one, the boy who made friends easily, the one who never seemed to get into trouble no matter how reckless he was. I was the opposite: reserved, bookish, careful. I suppose that contrast only deepened as we grew older. While I was working overtime to save for my house, Mark was borrowing money from my parents to cover the expenses of his growing family. Yet somehow, in my parents' eyes, he could do no wrong. The truth is, I don't resent Mark for having a family. I don't even resent him for being the favorite. What I resent is the invisible hierarchy my parents built, where Mark's choices automatically had more weight than mine, simply because he fulfilled their idea of what life should look like. When I first bought the house, it was nearly falling apart. The roof leaked when it rained, the wallpaper was peeling in every room, and the plumbing rattled like bones whenever I turned the faucet. Friends who came to visit would joke that I had bought a haunted house, but I didn't mind. I saw potential. I saw a place I could shape with my own hands. I spent weekends fixing it, learning how to repair, paint, build. I remember the first night I finally managed to make the fireplace work. I sat on the floor with a bottle of cheap wine, watching the flames dance, feeling like the king of my little world. No one helped me. No one believed I could do it. But I did. That's why the house is more than property. It's proof of my independence. Proof that I didn't need to follow the script my parents had written for me. Proof that I had built something lasting on my own. Family dinners at my parents' place were always tense for me. The table was long, the dishes always abundant: roast lamb, potatoes, Evelyn's famous apple pie. Mark would sit at the center with Sophie, the children beside them, while my parents glowed with pride. They'd ask Ella about school, James about soccer practice, Sophie about her work, and then the spotlight would shift to me, always with the same questions. "So, Daniel, any special someone yet? When are you going to give us some good news? You know, time doesn't wait forever." I would smile politely, deflect the questions, and try not to let the bitterness show. It wasn't that I didn't want love. It's just that life unfolded differently for me. I had relationships, yes, but none lasted long enough to reach the altar. And maybe, just maybe, I like living alone. I liked my independence. But admitting that to my parents would have been like confessing a crime. Mark never missed the opportunity to tease me. "You should try those dating apps, Don, or maybe we'll set you up with one of Sophie's friends. You can't be picky forever." He'd laugh, and everyone else would laugh too. I'd force a smile, but inside, the words stung. Outside of family drama, my life was calm. My routine might seem dull to others, but I found comfort in it. Mornings started with coffee in the garden, the sun rising over the rooftops, the air filled with the cries of gulls. Work was demanding, but manageable, and my colleagues respected me. Evenings were my sanctuary. I cooked, read books, sometimes played the piano I had inherited from my grandmother. Weekends were for long walks along the beach, where the waves washed away the noise of the world. Too many, that life might seem lonely. To me, it was peace. I believed that if I stayed quiet, if I minded my own business, if I kept building my little world inside that house, the opinions of others wouldn't matter. I thought I was safe. But life has a cruel way of testing the things we value most. Looking back now, I realized the signs were there long before the confrontation happened. My parents would drop subtle hints. My mother once said, Mark's kids could use a bigger backyard to play in. Your garden would be perfect for them. My father added one evening, when you're older and alone, who's going to take care of this house? Wouldn't it make sense to let it go to someone who can actually use it? I brushed those comments aside, thinking they were harmless remarks. I didn't imagine they were planting seeds for something far more serious. If I had known then what was coming, maybe I would have prepared. Maybe I would have drawn firmer boundaries, spoken up, told them that my life was not theirs to rearrange. But I didn't. I believed blood meant loyalty. I believed family, no matter how frustrating, would never turn against me. I was wrong. That is the backdrop of my story, a quiet life in Brighton. A house filled with memories, parents who never saw me as enough, and a brother who always stood in the center of their world. At that time, I thought the worst thing I had to endure was their judgment. I had no idea that soon, the very people I called family would try to take away the one thing that anchored me. The house I built with my own hands, the home that carried my soul. And that's where the storm begins. It started on a Sunday evening, the kind of evening where the sky over Brighton was brushed with pale shades of orange and gray. I had been invited, as usual, to dinner at my parents' house. Normally, these dinners were predictable, endless small talk about Mark's children, my parents' health, and the occasional joke about my single life. But that night, the air felt heavier, as though a storm was hiding behind the quiet clinking of silverware. We were halfway through the meal when my father, Richard, set down his fork and cleared his throat. That small gesture, so ordinary, yet so deliberate, silenced the table. I looked up from my plate of roast lamb, already bracing myself for whatever lecture was about to come. "Daniel," he said, his voice steady but firm, "your mother and I have been talking. We've been thinking about the future, your future, and the family's future." I gave a cautious nod, unsure where this was going. My mother, Evelyn, leaned in. "You know we love you, dear. But, well, you don't have a family of your own. No wife, no children. Meanwhile, Mark and Sophie are raising kids. They're cramped in that little apartment. It isn't fair." I froze, the words hanging in the air like shards of glass. Richard continued. "What we mean is, wouldn't it make sense for Mark and his family to move into your house? They need the space. You, on the other hand, well, you don't need all that room for yourself." The silence that followed was deafening. My fork clattered against the plate as I set it down. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Surely they weren't serious. Surely this was some kind of twisted joke. But then I looked at Mark. He wasn't laughing. Mark avoided my gaze, instead reaching for his glass of wine. Sophie, sitting beside him, gave a polite little smile, as though this conversation had been rehearsed. My parents stared at me expectantly, as if waiting for me to simply agree, to nod and hand over the key to the life I had built. "You can't be serious," I finally said, my voice low but trembling. "Daniel," Evelyn said softly, "we're only being practical. You're alone. Mark has responsibilities, children to raise, a wife to provide for. Don't you think it's better if the house is put to proper use?" "Proper use," I repeated, my chest tightening. "This house is my home. I bought it. I worked for it. I spent years fixing it up. And now you're telling me it belongs to Mark because he has kids." Richard sighed, as though I were being childish. "It's not about ownership. It's about family. About doing what's right for the bigger picture." I wanted to scream, but my voice cracked instead. "So my life doesn't matter because I'm not married? Because I don't have children? Is that what you're saying?" Mark finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "Don, it's not like that. But think about it, your house is perfect for us. The kids would love the garden. Sophie and I could finally have space to breathe. And you don't really need all that space. You could get a smaller place, maybe an apartment closer to work. It makes sense." His words felt like a knife. Not only were my parents against me, but my brother, the very person who should have respected my effort, was already planning how to live in my home. The rest of the dinner blurred into a haze of arguments. My parents tried to frame it as a family decision, but I saw it for what it was, a theft dressed as duty. Evelyn tried to calm me down with sweet tones. Richard grew sharper every time I resisted, and Mark stayed quiet, nodding at the right moments, like a vulture waiting for its prey to collapse. At one point, Sophie chimed in gently. Of course, Daniel, we'd make sure you're comfortable. Maybe you could even stay with us for a while, until you find another place. The children adore you. It could be nice, all of us together. Her kindness only fueled my rage. Stay with you? In my own house? I snapped. Do you even hear yourselves? Ella and James sat silently, wide-eyed, not fully understanding, but sensing the tension. Evelyn quickly changed the subject to dessert, as if apple pie could glue the family back together. But the damage was done. I left that night without touching the pie. Back home, I paced the living room for hours. Their words echoed in my head. You don't have a family. You don't need the house. Mark deserves it more. How could they dismiss everything I had worked for so easily? This house wasn't just walls and furniture, it was a decade of sacrifice, of sweat and determination. It was my identity. And now my own parents were asking me to erase myself for the sake of their favorite child. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house reminded me of the possibility of losing it. I imagined Mark's children running through the halls, Sophie redecorating, my parents visiting as if it had always belonged to them. And me, where would I be? Alone in some rented apartment, stripped of the one thing I had built with my own hands. A few days later, my parents invited me over again. I didn't want to go, but part of me hoped they had reconsidered, that the dinner had been a misunderstanding. It wasn't. This time, they came prepared with solutions. Evelyn suggested that I sell the house to Mark for a family discount. Richard suggested that I gift it outright. Think of it as an investment in the next generation, he said. When I refused, the disappointment in their eyes was unmistakable. My father shook his head, muttering, selfish. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. That word selfish burned like acid. For years I had been the one who never asked for money, who carried my own burdens without troubling them, while Mark leaned on their support time and time again. And yet, I was the selfish one. Mark, sitting quietly, finally spoke. Look, Don, I know this is hard, but Mom and Dad are right. You don't need that house the way I do. Don't fight them on this. It'll just tear the family apart. I stared at him, barely recognizing the boy I once shared a bedroom with. The family, or you? I asked. He didn't answer. Words spread quickly. My parents, apparently, weren't shy about telling relatives and neighbors that I was being difficult. Soon, I began receiving calls from aunts and uncles, each one urging me to think of the children and do the right thing. It was as if the entire family had turned into a chorus, chanting the same message: give up your home. At work, I struggled to focus. My mind was consumed by anger, confusion, and fear. Even my closest friends noticed the change in me. One evening, over beers, my friend Michael asked what was wrong. I told him everything, and he stared at me in disbelief. They can't just take your house, Don. It's yours. Legally, morally, everything. Don't let them guilt you into it. His words gave me some relief, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just about legalities. This was about blood, loyalty, the unspoken weight of family expectations. Fighting them meant more than protecting property. It meant standing alone against everyone I had ever called kin. Weeks passed, but the tension didn't fade. My parents brought it up every time we spoke, each time with more frustration. Mark grew bolder, dropping comments like, when we move in, I'll finally fix that leaky roof. Or Ella's already picked which room she wants. It was as though they had already erased me from the equation, as if my protest were just noise that would eventually die down. But inside me, something was shifting. I had always been the quiet one, the peacemaker, the son who avoided conflict. Yet now, backed into a corner, I felt a new kind of fire. If they wanted a battle, I was ready to give them one. That was the beginning of the conflict. The moment when family dinners turned into negotiations. When my parents stopped seeing me as a son and started seeing me as an obstacle. I realized then that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan, carefully laid out, and I was expected to comply. But I wasn't going to surrender. Not without a fight. The weeks that followed were some of the most exhausting of my life. The conflict had begun with words over dinner, but soon it spilled into every corner of my existence. My house, once my sanctuary, became a battlefield, and I could feel the walls closing in on me. It started innocently enough. Mark began dropping by unannounced, often with his children in tow. At first, I tried to be polite. After all, Ella and James were just kids. They didn't know any better. But soon, I realized these visits weren't casual, they were rehearsals. One Saturday morning, I heard the sound of laughter outside my window. I stepped into the garden and found Ella and James running across the grass, chasing each other, their shoes tearing through the flower beds I had carefully planted. Mark stood nearby, hands on his hips, surveying the yard as if he were already the owner. "This place is perfect for them," he said casually, not even looking at me. "They need space like this. They'll grow up so much happier here." I clenched my fist. "Mark, this is my home. You can't just bring your kids here whenever you feel like it." He shrugged, unfazed. "Relax, Dawn. They're family. And soon, this will be their home too. Better they get used to it now." The audacity of his words made my blood boil. He spoke with such certainty, as if my resistance was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. From that day on, I began locking the gates whenever I wasn't home. But, even then, I would return to find signs that they had been their footprints in the soil. Toys left behind, the faint sound of laughter still lingering in the air. My parents became relentless. Every phone call turned into a lecture. "Daniel, stop being stubborn," my mother would plead. "Think about your brother's children," my father would bark. "Do you want to be remembered as the son who tore his family apart over a house?" They had perfected the art of guilt. Evelyn's voice carried sorrow, as if my refusal was a personal betrayal. Richard's tone carried authority, as if disobedience made me an ungrateful child rather than a grown man. Once, during a particularly heated argument, my father snapped. "You've always been selfish. You think just because you bought that house, it's yours forever. Houses belong to families, not lonely men who waste their lives in solitude." Those words cut deeper than I expected. Lonely man. That was how they saw me, not as their son, not as a person with worth, but as an incomplete version of what they thought I should be. To make matters worse, word had spread beyond the family. Our neighbors, people I had known for years, began dropping subtle comments. One morning, Mrs. Thompson from across the street waved at me and said, "I heard Mark might be moving in soon. The kids will bring so much life to the neighborhood." I forced a smile, my stomach churning. The narrative had already been twisted. In the eyes of the community, I was no longer the man who worked hard for his home. I was the obstacle standing in the way of what was best for the children. Unlike my parents and Mark, Sophie tried a different tactic. She visited one evening while Mark was at work, bringing a basket of muffins she had baked. "I don't want to fight with you, Daniel," she said softly, setting the basket on my kitchen table. "I know this is difficult, but try to see it from our perspective. We're struggling. The kids are growing. We just want to give them the best life possible." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "And you think the best life for them comes at the cost of mine?" "Sophie, this house isn't just walls and floors. It's mine. I bled for it. I sacrificed for it. And now everyone is acting like I don't deserve to keep it." She lowered her eyes. "I understand. Really, I do. But sometimes life requires sacrifices for the greater good. You'll be okay. You're strong. You'll land on your feet." Her words might have been meant as comfort, but to me, they were patronizing, dismissive. Strength had nothing to do with it. This wasn't about surviving, it was about being erased. Despite my anger, doubt began to creep in. What if they were right? What if I was being selfish, clinging to this house just to prove a point? Did I really need a whole home to myself? Wouldn't an apartment be enough? Late at night, I would walk from room to room, staring at the walls, the furniture, the memories. I tried to imagine giving it all up. Every vision ended with me standing in a small, empty apartment surrounded by silence, while Mark's family filled this house with laughter. The thought made me sick. Still, the seed of doubt was there, planted by the people who knew me best. Thankfully, not everyone sided with my parents. My friend Michael remained steadfast. "Dawn, listen to me," he said one night at the pub. "You owe them nothing. You worked for that house. If Mark wants one, let him earn it the same way you did. Don't let them guilt you into giving it up." Another friend, Claire, added, "This isn't about fairness. It's about control. They see you as the easy target because you're quiet, because you don't fight back, but you have to fight this time." Their words reignited the fire in me. For the first time, I considered legal options, consulting a lawyer, drafting documents, making it clear that my house was untouchable. The breaking point came in another Sunday dinner. This time, I almost didn't go, but something inside me told me I needed to face them directly. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension. My father's arms were crossed, my mother's lips pressed tight. Mark sitting there like a soldier waiting for orders. Richard wasted no time. "Daniel, we've given you weeks to think. Enough is enough. Mark and Sophie need that house. We've all agreed it's the best thing for the family. It's time you stop fighting and do the right thing." I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. The right thing? For who? For you? For Mark? What about me? "You're one man," my father snapped. "One man who doesn't even have a family. Stop being selfish. The room erupted. My mother begged me to reconsider. Mark insisted I was dragging everyone through unnecessary pain. Sophie stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on the table. Finally, I slammed my hand down. This house is mine. I will not give it up. Not for you. Not for Mark. Not for anyone. If you think you can force me, then try. But I promise you if you do, you won't just lose the house. You'll lose me too. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. For the first time, I saw fear in my parents' eyes. Not because of my words, but because they realized I meant them. The night marked a turning point. The battle lines were drawn. No more polite conversations. No more subtle hints. It was we're now me against the very people who were supposed to stand by me. I didn't know how ugly it would get, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not surrender. The days that followed that quiet evening in Brighton seemed deceptively calm. The town carried on with its usual rhythm. Fishermen shouting near the docks. Children riding their bicycles through the narrow lanes. The occasional tourists strolling past with cameras slung around their necks. For most people, Brighton was a picture of serenity. But for me, Daniel, my inner world was far from serene. I could not erase the words that my parents had spoken. They had not come in the form of an argument, or even a carefully staged conversation. It was casual to casual, as if they were commenting on the weather or suggesting, I'd try a new brand of tea. Since you don't have a family, Mark should take your house. He needs more space for his wife and children. The sentence echoed inside me. Not like an explosion, but like a slow poison. Spreading, seeping into every corner of my thoughts. I tried to pretend it hadn't unsettled me. But each time I sat in the living room, surrounded by the familiar warmth of my home, I imagined it filled with someone else's laughter, someone else's belongings, someone else's claim. The first real confrontation came at Sunday dinner. Our family had a tradition of gathering at my parents' house once a week. Mark, his wife Claire, and their two children, Sophie and Adam, always came. I had grown accustomed to being the quiet uncle, sitting at the edge of the chaos, occasionally entertaining the children or washing dishes afterward. But that evening, the air was different. I noticed the looks exchanged between my parents and Mark. I noticed Claire's unusual silence, as if she were carefully guarding words that she wanted to spill. Halfway through dinner, my father cleared his throat. He was a man of few words, usually speaking only when necessary. That made his next statement even more striking. Daniel, your mother and I have been thinking. Mark's family has grown. They're running out of space in their house. You live alone in a house that's far too big for one person. It only makes sense that Mark and his family move in. The room fell silent. Even the children, usually too busy with their mashed potatoes, looked up. I stared at my plate, unable to form words. Finally, I managed. But it's my house. I bought it. I worked for it. My mother leaned forward, her voice soothing but dismissive. Yes, darling, we know. But think of the bigger picture. You don't need all that space. Mark's children do. They need a garden to play in, a proper home. Claire finally spoke, almost whispering. It would be temporary, just until we sort things out. But her eyes betrayed the truth that it would never be temporary. Something inside me cracked. For years I had tolerated being the other son, the one who didn't bring grandchildren, who didn't give my parents the joy of family milestones. But this was too much. No, I said firmly. My voice shook, but the word was strong enough to silence the room again. This house is mine. It's where I live. It's not a storage space for whoever needs it. I won't give it up. Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. His expression wasn't angry, it was smug. Come on, Daniel. Don't be selfish. You've had that house all to yourself for years. You don't even use half the rooms. We're talking about family here. My children deserve better. His words hit me like stones. Selfish. Was I selfish for wanting to keep what was mine? Or was he selfish for demanding it? The argument escalated, voices rising, emotions spilling out like waves crashing against rocks. My parents sided with Mark at every turn, repeating phrases like you'll understand when you have children, and it's only fair. I left the dinner early that night, my appetite gone, my heart heavy. What unsettled me most in the following weeks wasn't just the words, it was the actions. Mark started visiting my house more frequently. Sometimes he'd bring Claire and the children. At first, he'd make excuses. We were just in the neighborhood, or the kids wanted to see their uncle. But soon it became clear that these weren't casual visits. They were inspections. I caught Mark measuring the living room wall with his eyes, whispering to Claire about where the sofa could go. Claire walked through the kitchen, opening cupboards, commenting on how it would be perfect for storing the children's snacks. Sophie and Adam, innocent and unaware, ran through the hallway shouting, "This will be my room." No, this one's mine. I stood frozen, watching strangers lay claim to the spaces I had built with my own sweat and sacrifice. One evening, I met my old friend Oliver at a local cafe. Oliver was the kind of friend who listened without judgment. After an hour of avoiding the topic, I finally poured everything out. The dinner, the arguments, the visits. Oliver frowned deeply. Daniel, they can't just take your house. It's legally yours. Do you have the documents? Of course I do, I replied. But it's not just about legality. It's the fact that my own family thinks it's acceptable to treat me this way. Oliver leaned in, his voice firm. Then you need to set boundaries. If you let this continue, they'll push until you have nothing left. His words stayed with me. For the first time, I considered the possibility that this wasn't just family drama, it was a battle for my dignity. That night, I sat in the living room, the house eerily quiet. I looked around at the framed photos on the walls, the bookshelves filled with novels I had collected over the years, the worn armchair where I had spent countless nights reading. This house wasn't just walls and bricks. It was my sanctuary. It was the one thing in my life that felt truly mine. As I sat there, I made a silent vow. I will not let them take this from me. The weeks that followed my silent vow were some of the most unsettling I had ever experienced. Brighton, with all its charm, the seagulls crying above the pier, the salty wind sweeping in from the sea, the chatter of tourists in the lanes suddenly felt hostile. The city hadn't changed. I had. Everywhere I went, I carried the weight of the conflict with me. It began with phone calls. At first, they were polite reminders from my mother. Daniel, darling, you should think carefully about what we said. It's only practical. Mark's family needs a better place to live. Then they became guilt-laced sermons. You don't understand how difficult it is for your brother. His children share a small room. Imagine how hard that must be. You've always been the independent one. Surely, you can make a small sacrifice. When guilt failed, frustration entered her tone. You're being unreasonable, Daniel. We raised you better than this. Family should come first. I listened in silence most of the time. The phone pressed to my ear, my jaw tight. I wanted to scream, to remind her that I had worked for years, that I had paid every bill, every tax, every repair. But what good would screaming do? Then Mark started showing up uninvited. I would come home from work and find his car parked outside. Sometimes Claire and the children were with him. Sometimes he came alone. One afternoon, I arrived to find him in my garden, hands on his hips, surveying the space as though he already owned it. This would be perfect for a swing set, he muttered, not even acknowledging me at first. I clenched my fist. Mark, you can't just come here without asking. He shrugged. It'll be mine soon enough. I'm just planning ahead. Those words burned into me. It'll be mine soon enough. He spoke with such certainty, as if my protest were nothing but background noise, as if the decision had already been made without me. The next Sunday dinner was worse than the first. I had considered skipping it, but something in me wanted to face them, to prove I wasn't afraid. The moment I walked in, I felt the tension. My mother gave me a quick hug, my father nodded stiffly, and Mark smirked like a man waiting for a fight. Dinner was quiet at first, but eventually my father put down his fork and looked directly at me. Daniel, this needs to be settled. You're being stubborn. Mark's children need a home. You'll find another place. I set down my knife and fork, my hands trembling slightly. No, this is my house. I worked for it. I paid for it. It's not yours to give away. That night, I sat alone in my house, my body still trembling from the confrontation. I realized that Oliver was right. This wasn't going to stop. Words wouldn't be enough. Please wouldn't be enough. For the first time, I seriously considered calling a solicitor. It felt wrong. It felt like betrayal. But what choice did I have? My family had already betrayed me. If I didn't act soon, I risked losing everything. I looked around the room again, at the house I loved, and whispered to myself, I will fight. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of strength return. For weeks, I had tried to reason with them. I had tried to explain, to compromise, even to soften my tone. But every conversation ended the same way, with Mark's smug insistence that my house belonged to the family, and with my parents' quiet, persistent pressure. One rainy afternoon in Brighton, after another unannounced visit where Mark's children ran through my hallway, claiming bedrooms like little conquerors, I finally reached my breaking point. I sat down at my kitchen table, laptop open, hands trembling. For the first time in my life, I typed into a search bar, property solicitor, Brighton family dispute. I wasn't a man who trusted lawyers. I had always thought such measures belonged to other people's messy lives. But now, my life was messy, and if I didn't act, I would lose everything. The office of Margaret Hughes was small, tidy, and filled with the faint scent of old books. She was in her late 50s, with silver hair tied back neatly, and eyes sharp as glass. So, Daniel, she said after listening carefully to my story, let me be absolutely clear. This house is legally yours, yes? You purchased it. Your name is on the deeds, and you've paid all expenses. Yes, I replied, handing her the documents I had brought. She flipped through them quickly, nodded once, and closed the folder. Then you have nothing to fear from a legal standpoint. They cannot simply take it. They cannot move in unless you give permission. But, she leaned forward, her gaze piercing. Family disputes are rarely just about law. They're about pressure, emotional manipulation, sometimes intimidation. Her words cut into me. She was right. My family wasn't fighting me with lawyers, not yet. They were fighting me with guilt, with love twisted into obligation. So what do? I asked. She gave me a firm smile. You set boundaries, and if they try to cross those boundaries, you have me. I'll draft a formal letter. Consider it a line in the sand. 2 days later, Margaret's letter arrived at my parents' house. It was polite, but firm. The property at Daniel's address belonged solely to me, and any attempt to occupy or claim it without my consent would constitute trespassing. I knew the letter would ignite a storm, and I wasn't wrong. That Sunday, I received a call from my mother. Her voice, usually soft, was cold and brittle. How could you do this to us, Daniel? To your own family? You sent us a letter as if we were strangers. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. Because you weren't listening to me. You kept pushing. I had to make it clear. Clear, she snapped. Clear that you care more about bricks and mortar than your own brother's children? Clear that you'd rather hurt us than share what you don't even use? I didn't answer. Anything I said would only feed her anger. Family dinner stopped. Invitations no longer came. When I saw Mark in town, he ignored me, his jaw tight, his arm wrapped protectively around Claire's shoulders. My parents spoke to me only through clipped phone calls, usually to remind me how disappointed they were. It was a strange kind of war, not loud, not violent, but suffocating. Silence filled the spaces where warmth used to be. Every day, I questioned myself. Was I wrong? Was I cruel? Was I really selfish, as they said? But then I'd walk through my house, touch the books on my shelves, sit in my old chair, and remind myself, this is mine. This is my life. No one has the right to take it. One evening, as I returned home from work, I found an envelope shoved through my letterbox. The handwriting was Mark's, bold and angry. Inside was a handwritten note. If you won't do what's right, then maybe a judge will make you. You don't deserve that house anyway. You don't deserve this family. The words chilled me. It wasn't a legal document, just a threat, but it carried weight. I forwarded the note to Margaret the next morning. She didn't look surprised. This is intimidation, she said calmly. Empty words, but dangerous if ignored. Don't engage. If they want to involve the courts, they'll fail. But if they escalate, then we'll be ready. Her calmness steadied me. But still, the note sat heavy in my pocket, like a reminder that my own brother now saw me as an enemy. Brighton no longer felt like home. I avoided the streets near my parents' house. I stopped answering Mark's calls. Even old friends seemed distant, perhaps because I couldn't bring myself to tell them the full story. Ashamed of how bitter and small the fight sounded when put into words. But inside, it wasn't small. It was everything. It was the loss of belonging. It was the betrayal of blood. One night, alone in my kitchen, I whispered aloud, maybe I really don't have a family anymore. The walls didn't answer. The silence was absolute. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, almost intimate. Pale wooden benches, a judge with unreadable eyes. Mark sat at the opposite table, shoulders broad, suit tight, jaw clenched. Claire sat beside him, lips pursed, radiating quiet disapproval. My parents sat behind them, their faces heavy with disappointment. When the judge asked Mark to present his case, he stood confidently as if he believed his own lies. My parents supported Daniel for years, he said. Without them, he wouldn't even have had the chance to buy this property. We believe it is only fair that the family shares in its value. My children deserve a stable home, and my brother refuses to show compassion. The words burned. He wasn't just twisting the truth, he was rewriting it. When it was Margaret's turn, she rose smoothly. Your Honor, the law is clear. The property was purchased solely by my client. There is no evidence of financial contribution from the claimants. This case is not about fairness, it is about entitlement. And entitlement does not override ownership. Her words were sharp as knives. When I was called to testify, my chest tightened. I swore the oath, my voice trembling. Mr. Carter, the judge said they always use surnames. Why have you resisted sharing this property with your brother? I swallowed hard. Because it isn't about sharing. It's about control. They want to move into my life, into my home, without asking, without respecting my boundaries. I've worked for this house. It's mine. and I will not be bullied into surrendering it. Mark's eyes burned holes into me. My mother looked down at her lap, refusing to meet my gaze. Mark's lawyer, a younger man, slick and theatrical, tried to break me. Mr. Carter, is it not true that your parents supported you financially when you were younger? Yes, as parents do, I replied. They paid for my school lunches. They helped me when I was a student. That's what parents do for children. It was never an investment contract. He smirked. And yet you now deny them even the courtesy of visiting freely. I clenched my fist. They are welcome to visit, but visiting is not the same as taking possession. For a moment, the lawyer had no response. During the recess, I stepped outside into the cold air. Oliver was there, waiting on the steps. He handed me a cup of coffee without a word. You held your ground, he said quietly. I felt like I was drowning in there, I admitted. He shook his head. You were clear. Honest. That matters more than you think. For the first time that day, I breathed a little easier. When the hearing resumed, Margaret delivered her final words with precision. This is not a case of need. This is not a case of law. This is a case of one man attempting to guilt his brother into surrendering his property. If we start allowing emotional blackmail to override ownership, then no one in this country is safe in their own home. Mark's lawyer, in contrast, played on heartstrings. Your Honor, surely compassion must have a place in justice. My client's children deserve stability. Shouldn't we value family over cold paperwork? The judge listened, expression unchanged. The ruling didn't come that day. We had to wait a week. That week was hell. Every phone call felt like a knife. Every walk down the street felt like eyes were on me. Finally, the letter arrived. The judge dismissed Mark's claim in full. He called it frivolous and unsupported by evidence. He ordered Mark to pay part of my legal cost. I had won. Legally, I was safe. But as I read the judgment, my chest felt hollow, because victory in court didn't bring back my family. It only cemented the distance. The next time I saw my parents, they couldn't even look at me. My father muttered, "You should be ashamed." My mother wiped tears from her eyes. Mark never spoke to me again. He walked past me on the street once, his children clinging to his hands, and it was as if I were a ghost. I had defended my home, but in doing so, I had lost the people who once made it feel like home at all. The court's decision should have felt like liberation. On paper, I had won. The house was mine, indisputably. The threats, the claims, the legal daggers, they had all shattered against the wall of evidence. And yet, when I walked through the front door that night, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. The silence was heavier than ever. Not peaceful silence, but the silence of abandonment, of echoes left behind by voices that once belonged here. I poured myself a drink and stood by the window, staring into the night. No celebration, no relief, only emptiness. The weeks that followed were a strange limbo. I went to work. I came home. I pretended to live, but really I drifted. Sometimes, I would catch myself reaching for the phone, thinking, I should call Mom, tell her about the new project, ask about Dad's garden. And then I'd remember. They wouldn't answer. Or worse, they would. And I'd hear the quiet judgment in their voices. Mark disappeared completely. He had once been the brother who shielded me from bullies, who taught me how to ride a bike. Now, when we passed on the street, we didn't exist to each other. He had erased me. It felt like grieving, except no one had died. If not for Oliver, I might have drowned in that emptiness. He came often, sometimes without warning, just to sit with me. He didn't force words into the silence. He simply existed beside me, and in that quiet presence, I found a kind of fragile anchor. One evening, as we sat on the back porch, I said, I don't know if I did the right thing. Oliver tilted his head. Legally, yes. Morally, that's trickier. But survival isn't always clean. You protected yourself. That matters. His words didn't absolve me, but they softened the sharp edges of guilt. Winning had consequences. Word spread in the neighborhood. Some people praised me for standing my ground. Others whispered about cruelty, about choosing walls over blood. At the grocery store, I caught fragments of conversations. That's him, the one who kicked out his own family. Imagine dragging your brother to court. I wanted to scream that it hadn't been me who dragged them, but I stayed silent. The house became both fortress and prison. Every room was safe from intrusion, yet each room reminded me of who was missing. Months later, a letter arrived. Handwritten, trembling script. My mother's handwriting. Asterisk Daniel, we don't understand you anymore. We raised you to care for family, to choose people over possessions. Your father and I are hurt deeply, but we cannot change what has been done. Mark is wounded beyond words, and the children ask why their uncle doesn't visit. I don't know how to answer them. Still, you are our son. We cannot erase that. One day, perhaps, you will remember what family means. Until then, we pray for you. Asterisk. I read it 5 times. Each word felt like a nail hammered into my chest. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't rage. It was disappointment carved into paper. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into a drawer, and left it there too heavy to throw away, too painful to display. There were nights I considered giving in, calling Mark, offering the house, walking away from the fight entirely. But then I would remember the courtroom, the smug twist of his lawyer's lips, the betrayal in Mark's eyes when he turned lies into weapons. I would remember how my parents had sat behind him, nodding silently as he tried to strip me of everything I had built. And I would remind myself, surrendering wouldn't bring love back. It would only give them proof that I could be broken. So I stayed, alone. Time, as it always does, dulled the sharpest edges. The pain didn't vanish, but it became bearable. I poured myself into work. I renovated the garden, planting new trees. I painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, made the house into something that felt more like me and less like a battlefield. Oliver pushed me, gently, to live again. He dragged me to dinners, to concerts, to quiet weekends away. Slowly, the world outside the house stopped feeling hostile. But every time I returned home, the weight settled again. The house had become my sanctuary. Yes, but also my reminder of what I had lost. It was nearly 2 years later when I saw them again. I was walking through the park when I spotted Mark with his kids. They were older now, laughing, chasing each other across the grass. He stood watching, his face softened by fatherhood. For a moment, I thought he might look up, might nod, might crack the wall of silence. But he didn't. He turned away, calling his children to him, as though I were invisible. And yet, as he gathered them, I noticed something, a flicker in his eyes. Not hatred, not anger, something closer to sorrow. It was the first time I realized, maybe, he wasn't as sure of his victory and estrangement as he pretended. He stood there, torn. I could have walked up, spoken, forced a confrontation, or I could let him go, preserve the fragile distance we had created. In the end, I chose silence, not out of pride, but out of fear. Fear that words would only reopen wounds too deep to heal. As I watched him leave, I whispered to myself, some battles never end. They just become part of who you are. That night, I sat in the living room and finally felt something shift. For years, I had seen the house as a fortress, a prison, a reminder. But now, I began to see it differently. Not as the place where I lost my family, but as the place where I proved to them, to myself, that I had the right to exist on my own terms. The scars remained, yes. The silence remained. But so, did I, still standing, still whole. People often ask if victory was worth it, if I would choose differently, knowing the cost. The truth is complicated. I miss my family. I miss the laughter of childhood, the warmth of belonging. I miss birthdays and dinners and the casual comfort of shared blood. But I also know this. If I had surrendered, if I had given away my home out of guilt or pressure, I would have lost myself. And perhaps that is the greater loss. Family can be broken, blood can betray, but the self, the fragile, stubborn self, that must be defended, even when the cost is loneliness. So yes, the price was high, but freedom always is. And as I sit here tonight, in the quiet of my house, I finally accept that it is mine. Not just the walls and the bricks, but the story, the scars, the survival. This home is not empty. It is filled with the truth of who I am. Mark slammed his hand on the table. The plates rattled. You don't deserve that house. You sit in it alone, wasting space, while my kids suffer. What kind of brother are you? Claire murmured, Mark, please, but her voice lacked conviction. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm the kind of brother who doesn't steal from his own family. That's what kind. The children looked frightened, their wide eyes darting between us. My parents were silent, their disappointment heavy in the air. I walked out that night, not looking back. That evening I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. Their words haunted me. Selfish, unreasonable, you don't deserve it. Doubt began to creep in. Was I wrong? Was I clinging to something out of pride? But then I looked around at the shelves I had built with my own hands, at the small repairs I had made when the roof leaked, at the paint on the walls that I had chosen myself. No, this house was more than a building. It was a piece of me, and giving it up would mean giving up the life I had built. The next day, I met Oliver again. We sat by the sea, gulls swooping overhead, the waves crashing against the shore. You need to take this seriously, Oliver said, sipping his coffee. Mark won't stop, and your parents won't stop either. If they think they can pressure you into giving up the house, they'll keep pushing until you break. I sighed. What am I supposed to do? Take my own family to court? Oliver looked at me steadily. If it comes to that, yes. But for now, Document everything. Keep a record of every phone call, every visit, every argument. You'll need proof. His advice made sense, though it felt strange to prepare for battle against the people who had raised me, who had once celebrated my small achievements, who had once tucked me into bed as a child. A week later, I returned home from work to find something that chilled me to my core. Mark's car was in my driveway, but this time, the trunk was open, filled with boxes. Claire was carrying a bag. The children were dragging suitcases toward my front door. I froze, keys still in my hand. "What are you doing?" I demanded. Mark turned, his expression calm, almost smug. "We've decided not to wait. You've had plenty of time to come to your senses. We're moving in." My heart pounded in my chest. "You can't just—" "Daniel," my mother's voice interrupted. She stepped out of the car, her face firm. "This is what's best for the family. You'll see in time." It felt like betrayal on every level. My own parents standing there, helping my brother invade my home, as though my existence were irrelevant. I stepped forward, blocking the doorway. "No one is moving in. Not today. Not ever." The children looked confused, their small faces anxious. Claire shifted uncomfortably, clearly not wanting a scene. But Mark's jaw tightened, and his fist clenched. "This isn't over," he growled. Then, one afternoon, as I walked along the Brighton pier, I saw Oliver again. He spotted me first and waved, pulling me out of my haze. "You look like hell," he said, half joking. "Thanks," I muttered. We sat on a bench overlooking the sea. I finally told him about the solicitor, the letter, the threat. He listened, nodding slowly. "You did the right thing," he said firmly. "You're not selfish. You're protecting yourself. Don't let them rewrite the story. You're not the villain here." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of strength. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this fight. It began with a knock on the door. A plain brown envelope, delivered by hand. Inside, official court papers. Mark had done it. The claim was absurd. He argued that our parents had an equitable interest in my house because of past financial support, and that therefore he and Claire should be entitled to a share. It was a thin argument, barely standing on legal legs, but it was enough to drag me into court, enough to turn our private war into a public battle. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the papers. My hands shook. I wasn't afraid of losing the house, not really. Margaret had assured me the law was on my side. What terrified me was standing in a courtroom, watching my family testify against me. Strangers listening as they painted me as cold, selfish, ungrateful. I wasn't just fighting for property. I was fighting for who I was. Margaret was calm, efficient, almost ruthless. She gathered every scrap of documentation, mortgage records, receipts, bank transfers, even old emails proving that my parents had never contributed a penny to the purchase. "They will try to argue emotion," she warned me, "that you owe them because you're their son. That Mark's children deserve stability more than you deserve solitude. But court is not about emotion. It is about evidence, and evidence is on our side." Still, I couldn't shake the guilt. Every night, I replayed my mother's voice in my head. "You chose bricks over blood.